These are really challenging times from a lot of different perspectives, but one perspective that people are only now beginning to look at is posture. What happens when school is closed and your kids are now sitting on the couch, hunched over a laptop or an iPad 3, 4, 6 hours a day? What happens when your office is closed and instead of sitting at what was a questionably ergonomically shaped chair to begin with, now you're also hunched over the couch over your laptop or a phone or an iPad? How does that affect your posture? The answer is not really great. And when you couple that with lack of movement, meaning many of us are walking a lot less than usual, and lack of exercise, many of the yoga studios and gyms that we might normally go to are closed, you have kind of a recipe for spinal health disaster. This took a couple of months to set in, but I've been getting more and more inquiries, and so I thought, hey, let's do a show with a returning guest, Esther Gokhale, who's been on the show many years ago and has a great book about back pain and done a lot of work in terms of figuring out how to be a modern person and tap into the ancestral knowledge that we have about posture, movement, health, and the spine. If you're new here, it's the Lucas Rockwood Show. I'm a yoga teacher, a trainer, a serial entrepreneur. I'm a father of 3 international kids, but first and foremost, I'm a student. I like to learn things, so I go out into the world of yoga and health and wellness and movement and medicine, and I try to find people who are doing interesting things and bring their best work to you here on the show, so hopefully we can all live more inspired lives. Let's see how it goes. If you like this show, the best thing to do is whatever app you're listening in, just scroll down and leave a rating and review. The best way to leave a review is just share an episode that you have found useful. There's a couple hundred, 400 plus episodes. So if you can give people a specific episode to start with, that's really helpful. The second thing is if you'd like to ask a question for the show, the best way to do it is to direct message me on Instagram. It's at Lucas Rockwood. And finally, if you'd like to join our Telegram channel, it's a private Telegram channel. We have a few thousand listeners there. Go to yogabody.com/students. yogabody.com/students. Thanks so much for listening. So hello and welcome everybody. Today's show is called 8 Steps to a Pain-Free Back. I am joined here with Esther Gokhale. Esther studied biochemistry at Harvard and Princeton and later acupuncture at the San Francisco School of Oriental Medicine. After pregnancy, she had really bad back pain. A failed back surgery inspired her lifelong crusade to help people with back pain. She's got this book, 8 Steps to a Pain-Free Back. Those of you who have done my teacher training programs, you know that it's often recommended as part of our reading list. The book has been really popular all around the world, 10 different languages, and you can learn more at gokhalemethod.com. Spelling's a little challenging. Let me spell it for you. Khale method.com, and we'll link up in the show notes as well. Esther, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
So we've got hundreds of millions, maybe even 1 billion people right now, whether they're students or office workers who are now working from home. And the work situation in their office was pretty bad to begin with, and now a lot of them are at home and they're sitting on their couch with a laptop in their lap, or they're sitting at the kitchen table hunched over a computer. And I know this because, well, I've been doing it too. And my office, I'm back in my office now, and I have a wonderful standing desk. But most people right now are listening to this hunched over a small keyboard, a small laptop, and for better or for worse, they're doing 8, 10, 12 hours a day there. In the context of all of your work over all these years and the situation right now, which is kind of a time bomb in terms of postural health, how are you thinking about this crisis, and how can you help students kind of contextualize how they can take responsibility for their posture and their spinal health?
Well, people are having to improvise, and that wouldn't be a problem if they had some guidelines and principles around which to improvise, but they don't. The people just sort of depend on an ergonomic chair, which, as you pointed out, was not well designed to begin with at the office. And now they don't have that, so they're just sort of subject to whatever the couch is doing to them, or the improvised countertop is doing, and they don't really know anything about height and shape in the spine and lengthening the spine and having a J spine instead of an S spine. Because if you knew these basic things about the human body, it wouldn't be any problem at all to work from home. Now, I've been working from home my entire career, and it has never been a problem and continues to not be a problem. And so now we're trying to share our knowledge widely because it's more relevant than ever. It's more needed than ever. And we're being successful. You know, we've invented our basic offerings to be delivered online. And to my amazement and slight embarrassment, it works as well, if not better, online than in person. And so I say embarrassment because I held this back. I was convinced that hands-on would be the best. And what I've discovered is that one of the things about teaching online is that it allows you to chunk the teaching into much smaller, digestible, bite-sized pieces. So we teach these very short lessons, and people have only one thing on their mind until the next lesson, possibly the next day or in 2 days. And that has worked astonishingly well.
It's funny you should say that. I had a very similar experience. I've been teaching online in one format or another for over a decade, but always my big courses, my certifications were always in person. And then, of course, with lockdown, we couldn't. And so reluctantly, we put everything fully online, and I had exactly the same experience. I thought, okay, so my 5-day course became 12, my 3-week course became 8 weeks, and so smaller chunks. And then I also found there's some real advantages of filming. And so, you know, we have people on video, and suddenly people can go back and not just get notes, but they can look at themselves moving, on a yoga mat and then get feedback from it. So I also had a similar experience where, I've been really anti anything in person, online stuff for years, and then suddenly I realized, whoops, it was my own mental block standing in the way. You dropped some terminology that I wanted to clarify, the J spine and S spine. I know some people are going, Lucas, stop talking, go back and tell us what that J spine versus S spine thing is. Can you unpack that one for us?
A J-spine is what you find in the populations that don't have back problems. So if you look at indigenous people, their behinds are out behind, and then up above, it's relatively flat. You don't have this super curvy S-shaped spine. And you find that same shape in very young children. Like if you think about a baby or a toddler, their behinds are out behind. They do not have a tucked pelvis, and they don't have this so-called natural lumbar curve in the upper lumbar area, and they don't have kyphotic thoracic spines and then craned necks. This thing that we have been describing as normal, that is usually called an S-shaped S-spine, is actually a really bad paradigm. And we want to go back, and that this J-spine you also find in old art and sculptures. If you look at any self-respecting Greek statue, he's got his behind. And, up above, it's pretty elongated all the way into the neck to the skull. And so what I'm teaching is that we've got the wrong paradigm, that we are working with this S-shaped paradigm and letting it influence our ergonomic chairs and our surgical Harrington rods, and our directions on what you should do, like tuck the pelvis. A lot of the directions on posture are not just incorrect, but they're actually counterproductive. Like we tell people to tuck the pelvis and chin up and chest out and do crunches to develop abdominal strength. Wrong. Crunches will crunch your nerves, they'll crunch your discs. The Canadian Army has thrown them out. And the U.S. Army, if you have a back problem, you're not allowed to do them. And it's high time that they get thrown out in the lay culture as well. But right now, they're still the most popular exercise that people do for their abs. And we do all these things that are counterproductive, And S-spine is a big problem. Paradigm shift needed.
So people are hearing stick your bum out, and now they're thinking, oh, perfect, my high heel shoes are doing just the right thing. So help us understand. The other challenge I know is someone like me who basically, I have no bum. There's just nothing there. And then other people just genetically, they have a nice round bum, so they get kind of focused on the musculature, whether it's developed or so.
Right there.
Yeah. So let's strip away the musculature. Let's look at a pelvis.
You've thrown a few things at me. So definitely do not stick your bum out. If you stick your bum out, you've just tightened up your erector spinae muscles and squunched everything in the upper lumbar spine. Bad. Yeah. So And your comment about I have no bum. Well, if people have no bum, and, we have to check whether that's actually true. Everybody has a bum. But if it hasn't been developed, that's usually because it's been tucked. And if you have a tucked bum and you go to the gym and you're doing your 30 reps or 60 reps, that's not going to cut it. And squats, even if you do very conscientiously lots of squats and whatever else you're doing, it's not going to be the 5,000 reps a day that you need to sustain true gluteal tone. And how is anybody going to get 5,000 reps a day and remain sane? Answer:
walking around.
Included in your gait. Exactly. Every step is a rep. And if you're not doing that, there's no way to make up for that lost opportunity. So there's no escape from learning how to do life exercises skillfully. You need to walk well. You need to sit well. You need to know how to bend, because that is your hamstring stretch and your glute max stretch and your rhomboid strengthener and your erector spinous strengthener. And, if you're not doing everyday life the way nature designed, then trying to make up for that in a gym or in a few reps here and there or at home, even harder, it just doesn't work.
And let's imagine we were looking at a skeleton in profile, so we don't get caught up on the size or lack thereof of the musculature of the glutes. Are you looking for a slight anterior, slight posterior, a neutral pelvis? Let's imagine, for people listening, a glass of water is balancing on those,
sure,
on the top of the pelvis,
sure,
if there was an imaginary flat board or something.
Yes. So I actually very diligently avoid that nomenclature, because it's been used to mean a variety of things, including things that are really wrong and so like forward pelvis or anterior pelvis tends to mean very simply that the pelvis is at an angle with the floor. Okay? What it doesn't refer to is, why is that pelvis at an angle to the floor? Is it because there's a curve at L5-S1, which I would claim is a very healthy thing to have? Or is it that part is stiff and several vertebrae up into the lumbar spine are being dragged into an arch? Extremely unhealthy. Yeah? And if you're not going to make the distinction between whether the curve is happening at L5-S1, healthy, or up higher, totally unhealthy, then what's good is the nomenclature. So I don't even use it, because I don't want to enter the fight and define what forward pelvis means or what anterior pelvis means. So I use the term anteverted pelvis, which very simply means you've got a healthy curve at L5-S1, which allows a wedge-shaped space that perfectly fits the wedge-shaped L5-S1 disc. And end of story. Up above, you've got a nicely stacked spine that doesn't take giant effort to maintain upright. It doesn't take much effort at all, in fact, and then it allows you this natural movement with the breathing, which allows the discs to rehydrate, allows the blood to circulate. A lot of magic there in the way nature designed us to be. But we have to have our behind out behind. And I always like to joke that it's called a behind for a reason. When people invented that term, they actually knew where this part goes. And so it obliges us to follow nature's design and not try to improvise, because it's very unlikely that we're going to improve on what happened in the 6 million years of us being upright. Yeah? I think this problem was well solved by nature, and now we just need to figure out what that design is, because when we arrive on the planet, we don't come with the user's manual. So we have to figure it out if the culture is not supporting us properly, which modern culture totally doesn't support properly.
When we switch anything in our life, there's always a bit of friction. And to improve our posture, I find there's just a huge interest in changing posture. And I'll give a couple of personal examples. I changed my footwear. I guess it was about 10 years ago. I just stopped wearing any kind of elevated heels. And about 5 years ago, actually, I switched to a standing desk. And both of those changes have been extremely positive, and they were initially extremely uncomfortable. I spent with my standing desk. I think I spent about three months just miserable, knee pain, back pain, fidgeting,
Wow.
and then suddenly the opposite.
And you persisted?
And then suddenly I can't be without it. So when I'll go to a hotel, I'll stack chairs, anything I can. But it really took some stick-to-itiveness. I really had to fight the fight, or I would have suffered. And the transition from shoes also, I find that people's musculature and in some cases even their bones have reorganized if they've been wearing an elevated heel shoe for most of their life. How do you help people think about that kind of in-between zone where they're...
We have very different approaches, it sounds like, because your approach I would describe as more, jump in, throw someone into the deep end of the pool,
sure.
And, now they'll figure out how to swim. But my concern is maybe they won't, You have people who wear minimalist shoes and, actually do damage to their feet.
For sure.
Go barefoot and they go run and, maybe the pavement is going to educate your feet on how to be, but maybe it won't. And you are very aware and you have a lot of background and so on, and you probably have more pegs in your brain to help figure this out intuitively. But most people, in my experience, flounder.
You mentioned the gym a couple of times. I'm curious, in your experience, is some resistance training helpful for improving posterior chain strength / posture? Should people just think about body weight? Does it just depend on the individual? Or how might you talk about resistance training, adding a little bit of weight training to help people with their posture?
It all depends. I put a lot of stock in people's personal preferences. I used to not like going to the gym until I framed it differently. I started thinking of it as like going to an Italian piazza where you people watch, here, and I especially like the Y because it's a very democratic institution and you have all people of different sizes and shapes, and it's not just the young and the beautiful, working on their Popeye muscles, but, people of all kinds, and also the cancer survivor group and who are just unbelievably courageously working for their lives. And it's inspiring to me. And so for those reasons, I like going to the gym. And so I changed my mindset around that. But it's very personal. And now it's not even available, right? So it can be done in so many ways. So yeah, that's one way, working with weights. And for certain targeted, if you've discovered a muscle that is particularly weak, then having some weights to work with to bring that muscle up to par can be useful. But it can also be done in 100 other ways, in yoga, in dance, in everyday life activity. For that, there is no substitute. You definitely want that in addition to whatever else you're doing. But, to jumpstart a muscle can be useful.
We had a guy named Kelly Starrett on the show a couple of years ago, and he's the one who convinced me to get into standing desks. And he had something which I thought was interesting. Is he was saying the best posture is the next one. The idea that in a more primal.
Yeah, to me that's a cop out.
Tell me.
Yeah.
Say more.
Yeah, I don't like that phrase actually, because it's such a cop out. It's saying that every position is unhealthy, and I think that's why he has dissed sitting. Because he doesn't know how to sit. And so he's calling it bad. And so if you have a bad position, you better be changing off frenetically, because sitting in one bad position is really bad for you. It's much better to have one bad position after the other than just statically in one bad position. But
sure.
If you know how to sit well, then there is no problem whatsoever with sitting peacefully, harmoniously. I mean, think about the Buddha. Think about every meditator. Think about every person who plays the piano. What are they supposed to do? Standing piano? If this is such a bad thing to sit, then you have just written off much of the musical world. You've written off, anyone who wants to travel long distances, because you're not going to be allowed to stand in the plane, and you can curse and fuss all you want, but you're not going to do that. And it's silly to me. We are extremely well designed. We are perfectly capable of sitting for an extended period. Now, not 8 hours straight, and not, you So you want to move, you want to change it up, absolutely, but you don't have to be so concerned about this bad position that you have to be, the next position is the best position. To me, that's just a complete misunderstanding of how marvelously designed the human body is. You can sit, you can stand, you can walk, you can lie, you can do whatever you want, and you don't have to be so worried that it's so terrible for you to stay there for more than 2 seconds. You know, you can totally relax, meditate, you can play your piano, you can do whatever you want if you do it well. And it's not rocket science to learn, but you do have to learn this J spine. Like, these people are still stuck with their S spine. And if you got an S spine and you're tucking your pelvis and trying to thrust out your chest to sit up straight and calling it all kinds of fancy language like lift the heart, but basically you're just squinching up your lumbar spine, then yes, the best position is the next position. But you don't have to go there. You don't have to go there. You can have a much more peaceful and nice existence.
So my work life has changed quite a bit, like most people, since lockdown. And I am finding, I'm working in my home, I'm working in my empty yoga studio, and I'm working in my office. And all of my workspaces I've found to be much better the less stuff I have. And so I do have a chair here in my office that I rarely use, though sometimes. And in my studio I have meditation cushion, yoga mat, a very low stool, which I use to make a standing desk. And I find very similar to what you've said. I sometimes will teach, I'll be lecturing. Sometimes I do it standing, which is very comfortable, of course, and more reminiscent of my old days of teaching. But sometimes lately I've been doing a full class seated on a hardwood floor for 3 hours, and I feel great. I feel really fine. It's really quick. It's interesting how quickly you can adapt, which is, when I first found your work, I was living in Thailand, and I spent a decent amount of time with hill tribes of northern Thailand and Laos, and I found very similar to your research that
so good.
Yeah, people have just great posture. They don't have any furniture, which was really interesting. So, they would squat, and they would squat to eat. They would squat to chat. People would squat along the trail just to have a chat. Full deep heels to ground, ass to grass squat. And really great mobility, really great muscle tone. Just simple and natural. And I realized it really inspired me when your book kind of connected the dots between just the simplicity and natural movements. And I saw baby strapped to back, similar to what I've seen you do in videos and things like this. Tell me.
So I have a lot to say about this because, yes, I, too, really like a minimalist existence. That's my personal style. I don't advocate that for everyone. But when it comes to posture, I don't think a modern Western person can suddenly decide they want to be like that village Indian, because we did not grow up sitting on the floor cross-legged. We did not grow up squatting on a pit toilet every time we need to go to have a bowel motion or pee. We grew up on a Western-style commode and sitting at the dining table, most of us. And in all those years, the cartilaginous plates in our body, in our joints, ossify, right? So, for example, in your hip joint, you have 3 cartilaginous plates. The first pair ossifies. Well, it ossifies on a certain timetable that's done at age 16. In all those years, what you are doing, I believe, dictates how that ossification pattern takes place. And you do not get to edit that later in life. So what's available to you is very culturally determined, in my experience. And you take a modern Western person, and I've seen Kelly Starrett do a full squat, and to me, there's a huge amount of loading on the lumbar discs. And, you can get away with it for a while, but you've got like 20-some layers of fibrous external material in those discs. And, if you just keep loading them, you are wearing them slowly and surely. And I know it well from personal experience because I came at this the hard way, right? I used to be a yoga model in Bombay, and very impressive, especially in the backbend arena. And people would clap, and I could do my chakrasana and grab my ankles, and I could do all these acrobatic things, lie, prone on the floor and have my feet touch the floor beyond my head and clap, clap, clap. Oh, I know it well. And at age 27, I had a herniated L5S1 disc. Well, when that stares you in the face, then all your theories go out the window, you know. Pain is it brings you back to reality very quickly. And so I have come to believe that modern Western people need to adapt. It's like imported technology, and a full squat is usually not available in a healthy way. You can get there by loading your discs and rounding your spine, pronating your feet usually, and, you know, it takes, and you maybe can get almost there, but almost everybody I have met needs a little height under the heels to really make a flat, and I have pictures up the kazoo, you know, of village Orisons, completely flat back. And when I say flat, I don't mean forced into some kind of quasi-flatness. I mean just at ease. You know, the ankle mobility is something that they have. You rarely see in our culture because we're not squatting all day, every day, you know. So now you can try to force it and pronate your feet and destroy all the ligaments in there, you know. So now you have bunions and you have, I just see a mess with people who are trying to push to be like those village Indians because they think it's like so super spiritual to, you know, be cross-legged on the floor without support. And to me, one of the geniuses in this field was Iyengar, because Iyengar, bark, kick, shout, Iyengar, you know. Difficult as his manner was, and I know that personally because he was a very close friend of my mother, and I was in his classes, and you know my whole family was there, and so I know how frustrated he was that his Western students couldn't do what he wanted them to do. And he almost apologetically arrived at the realization that you have to use props for these Westerners. They just, no matter how much you push and kick them, they just don't do it. They can't do it. And to me, that was genius, even though he came at it apologetically, you know. And so he has all these props. And he came up with wedges that Westerners need to sit on to make up for their lack of hip mobility, no matter how much you push and kick. You know, and those ligaments, you can loosen them and do a bunch of damage and then kind of be okay. But he had the eye to see that it wasn't the same. And when you put a little wedge under their bum, then hey, and lo and behold, it approaches what you want. And so that's what I teach people. If you sit on the ground, then use a wedge if you're a modern Western person. And lo and behold, everything eases up and your back can move freely with the breath. And, you know, so even Indian people, like one of my students is Kala Ramnath, the very famous Indian violinist who plays with the Kronos Quartet and Yo-Yo Ma and such. She came to me and she was like 7 generations of court musicians in India. Okay, so this is totally in their tradition, in their blood. She was trained since age 2 by her grandfather. So she sat on the floor until age 12 when her family moved up in life, and then they moved to a Western dining table and a Western. So when she came to me, she was playing violin, Indian violin, on the floor cross-legged, and she had a horrible back problem and thinking about changing career. She was, you know, a very dramatic story, actually, and we have it on our video testimonials on our website. But, you know, I had to teach her to modify. You know, it's like imported technology. You have to modify a little bit because she needed a very small wedge, but she still needed something under her bum to make this all work out. I mean, I have to teach her other things too, that she got corrupted in, you know, from modern lifestyle. But yeah, that's my take.
I think it's a great insight. I guess there's I think chasing this ideal primal ancestral image that we have, I think that's not really very realistic. I agree with you. I guess the challenge is, I have a lot of clients who can't tie their shoes and they can't pick something up off the floor without straining their lower back. And at that point, I guess it's not that they just have a Western body type. They're actually dysfunctional, and that kind of has to be addressed, even if it's
Well, there's
a long process.
Two things, yeah. Like their muscles may be stiffened from all their usage, and that can be changed. Muscles are infinitely changeable. But bones, you can't edit the way your bones have ossified, And when you're born, your hip joint is cartilage, your hip, knee, ankle, all cartilage, no bone in there. And, but that changes. And once it's become bone, now you don't get to redo that.
Esther, great conversation. I know that our listeners will love to reconnect with you. For people who want to follow your work online, shall we send them to your website? Are you active on social? What's the best place for them to connect with you?
The best place is definitely our website. That's where we get to organize the material in ways that make sense. Social media, blink and wink and it goes away, and so that's not the best place.
Esther, I appreciate what you're doing. It's great to reconnect, and let's keep in touch. When I first started practicing yoga, I was so stiff that I couldn't touch my toes. My hands would come about halfway down my shins. When I sat on the floor, my knees would be way up off the ground. My hips were so tight, and I couldn't do any semblance of a back bend whatsoever. And I thought, well, yoga is about stretching. Everybody assumes that yoga is about stretching, and this will work. And I got to yoga class, and I loved yoga class, and I really enjoyed it as a student, but I realized it wasn't really about stretching. Stretching was part of it, but it was like number 5 on the list. There was strength and balance and focus and breath, and flexibility was in there, but it wasn't prioritized. And for most people, that's great. Most people don't want to do flexibility training all day long, but I did. I wanted to fix my hips and fix my hamstring. I was in my early 20s and I was moving like an old man. I wanted to feel more youthful. So I developed a system called gravity yoga. And gravity yoga is based on age-old principles that have been around forever, but this really idea that if you want to build muscle, you want to contract it. If you want to lengthen muscle, you need to relax it. It sounds really basic, except if you think about the activities that you've been doing to try to stretch, probably hasn't been working, right? In any case, many of you have done my hip opening challenge, which is a gravity yoga challenge. Many of you have done my gravity yoga at home program, like 100,000 of you have done that program. And I now have a gravity yoga teacher training program. It's online. It's 12 days in a row. It's live with me and my training team. And we walk you through all the principles of gravity yoga, the anatomy, the physiology. We guide you through 3 fixed sequences along with creative sequencing so that you can work with clients in 2 ways. One of them is privately as a supplemental practice, so helping people to work on stuck hips and hamstrings and spine. And the other way is in workshops and regular classes, whether it's virtual via Zoom or whether it's in person at yoga studios or CrossFit boxes. Our gravity yoga instructors are doing really, really well. It's an exciting program, and we're starting really soon. To learn more, go to yogateacherscollege.com, and you will find our upcoming course calendar right there on the homepage. This week's nutritional tip is in response to a listener question on Instagram. Kylie says, Lucas, what's the best food to eat for weight loss? I know that's a very simplistic question, but is there something that helps? I want to give my normal answer where I'd go into a rant about macronutrient balancing and meal timing and all the normal stuff we teach, but I think maybe I'll just answer this question directly to scratch the itch. And the answer would be protein. If you had to choose one food that's going to be most helpful with weight loss, it's protein. For one specific, well, let's say 2 specific reasons. Number 1, protein is the most satiating of the macronutrients. So let's imagine that we had a pure bowl of fat, a pure bowl of protein, and a pure bowl of carbs. The protein is going to be the most satiating. And you already know this because it's pretty rare that you meet somebody who just eats 4 pounds of chicken breasts every day. It's pretty rare, right? You just don't want to. People often leave protein on the plate. It's hard to motivate to eat protein. A lot of people eat protein shakes simply because they struggle to actually physically eat protein. It's really filling, right? It's really heavy. So protein is really, really satiating, and for that reason, it can be really helpful for anyone on a weight loss protocol. I'm not talking about a high protein diet. There's a lot of negatives to that, but eating protein, and especially starting your day with protein and starting meals with protein, can be very effective. Most people wake up and have kind of a sugar bomb, like a muffin and a coffee, or a toast and a coffee. If you wake up and have a protein bomb, like a 25, 35 gram protein shake or some protein-rich food for breakfast, that can really curb your hunger. Which leads me into the second reason that protein is really helpful, is it doesn't hit your blood sugar too badly. Now, a lot of protein will it will turn into glucose and it will affect your blood sugar, but much less so than, carbs, for example. So if you wake up and have a muffin, that's just going to slam your blood sugar. If you wake up and have a 30-gram protein shake, that's not going to hit your blood sugar nearly as well. So you have the double whammy benefit. Protein's super satisfying, and it doesn't hit your blood sugar so much. So why didn't I say fat? Well, people really struggle with fat even more than protein. I personally go for fat. In fact, I love to eat fat. I can handle huge amounts of fat, 100 grams, 150 grams of fat a day, no problem. But for most people, that makes them pretty nauseous. Most people have a relatively easy time bumping up their protein. So what I'd encourage you to do, if you're looking for a simple solution, one of the best things you can do without getting into our usual macro balancing and meal timing and things like this, is just to start your day with protein. Rather than starting your day with carbs, start your day with protein. It'll really, really change how you feel hunger-wise and can sometimes tee you up and set you up for a good day of healthy eating. All that said, I would still default back to our usual Yoga Body diet approach, which is balancing your macros, it's meal timing, and no dogma. Hope that's helpful. We have a listener question from Timmy on Instagram. Lucas, I started doing your gravity yoga program. I'm on day 18. I'm wondering how long should it be before I see results? Gravity yoga, for those of you who don't know, is our targeted flexibility training program for hips and hamstrings and spine and shoulders, wrist twists and ankles. And to answer your question, Timmy, most people will see really noticeable results within 1 month, within 90 days, and then by 1 year, most people, if you're really stretching seriously, you'll achieve about 80% of what you're ever going to achieve if you really go for it, 15 minutes a day for a year. Here's the thing with flexibility. It's different than strength. And here's the story that I always tell. I was at an uncle's wedding, and this is quite a while ago, but I was at my uncle's wedding, and one of my aunties dropped down into the jazz splits on the dance floor. And I said, whoa, where'd that come from? And she said, I used to dance and do gymnastics and things in high school. And I was like, high school? High school? That was 30 years ago, right? That's flexibility. Why? Because you've actually changed the length of your connective tissues, your muscles, your fascia, and you've changed the elasticity, hopefully, of your tendons and your ligaments and other connective tissues, and it can really be long lasting. So without repetitive stress exercise, without total atrophy, total lack of use, flexibility gains can be really, really long lasting. Someone who could squat at age 18 can probably squat at age, well, maybe not 80, but let's say at age 60, very likely they can squat. Now let's take that same person at age 18. Let's imagine they're a high school athlete. Let's imagine it's a woman and she's a track and field athlete and she's ripped, right? She's got big shoulders and lifting weights and big, strong legs. At age 60, at age 50, that muscle is completely gone. In fact, that muscle was gone 6 months after graduation, maybe even 6 days after graduation. The muscle started to disappear. The thing about muscle is it's a metabolic hog. It takes up a lot of energy. It takes up a lot of resources in your body. So your body's not going to carry around that extra weight unless it needs it. With flexibility, it's different. That can just be part of who you are functionally. So flexibility is really exciting in that you're making an investment in your flexibility, in many cases, for life. Strength is really exciting because the gains come really fast, right? If you do 3 gym workouts this week, next week you'll literally feel stronger. You'll add a couple of kilos to your dumbbells and it's really rewarding. But it's really depressing because you take a holiday off for a week and you come back and you're noticeably, markedly weaker. So strength versus flexibility, it's the continual debate. But if you're working on your flexibility, Timmy, you should be able to notice some results within 4 weeks specifically. Just make sure you're following those 3 simple principles of gravity yoga. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to The Lucas Rockwood Show. If you enjoy the podcast, I have 2 asks of you. Number 1, share the show on social media with your friends and tag me. My handle is @LucasRockwood. Number 2 is please leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my mailing list, every week I send out information about the podcast, behind the scenes stuff, announcements of online classes and special events. I email about once a week. You can do that at yogabody.com/sign me up. And right now we have a free breathing worksheet on that page as well. It's yogabody.com/sign me up. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.